Hello, and welcome to this video tutorial in which I will show you how to clean a DeWalt 898 14-gauge nibbler. Cleaning the nibbler can become rather messy, so to start out I'm going to lay out some paper towel underneath the nibbler. Unlike many power tools, the nibbler is meant to take apart. This allows you to clean, sharpen, and replace many of the key components of the nibbler. Before we start taking it apart, I want you to take a look at the top of the head of the nibbler. There's a place where you can insert a flathead screwdriver and cycle the nibbler. If I turn it, you can see that the punch moves up and down. Take note that it starts out hidden in the housing of the nibbler and finishes in the die. When we put the nibbler back together, we want to make sure we put it just how it was before. So let's start taking our nibbler apart. On the die of the nibbler, which is the outermost piece, there's a cover. If we slide that down, we can see there's a pin on the inside. You don't want to lose that pin, it's very crucial to keeping the whole nibbler working together. Get a small tool and push that pin out. Now with the pin out, you can slide the die off of the nibbler. Now we will remove the housing of the punch. Behind the head of the nibbler there is a small Allen screw. Take your Allen key and loosen it. Loosen the screw out about 1/4 inch, and that will give the housing clearance to exit. I like to grab a paper towel to get a better grip when I pull it out. With the housing out, there's only one more piece to remove, and that's the punch. When I remove the punch, I want to be careful to count how many rotations it takes to unscrew it. This will allow me to screw it back in the way I had it before, and that will give it the proper height for cutting. So as I unscrew the punch, I am counting the rotations. For this nibbler, I count 6.5 rotations. Now we're on to the real messy part. I'll grab some paper towels and I'll clean the entrance to the head of the nibbler. Then I will begin to clean all the pieces that I took out. Oftentimes when cutting painted metal, the paint will build up on the outside of the punch. That can be a real nuisance for cutting. I'll grab a knife and gently chip off the buildup of metal and paint. The punch is the most common piece that needs to be replaced on the nibbler. Eventually, the nibbler won't cut like it used to, and that's due to the punch being dulled. If your punch does dull, you do not necessarily have to replace it immediately. You can grind off the top and resharpen the surface. You're able to grind the height of the punch down to 2.72 inches. That will give you a few sharpenings and save yourself from having to buy a new one. Aside from the punch, the next most common piece you would have to replace is the die, because the die does in fact have a cutting edge, but you are not able to sharpen that. I'm continuing cleaning all the pieces of the nibbler, scraping off all the metal and paint I can, and also wiping off the old oil. For cleaning the housing of the punch, I use a small tool just to get in there and scrape out the metal. With all the pieces cleaned, I will now re-oil them. It is important to keep them well lubricated while working in the nibbler. For lubrication, I prefer to use a gun oil. It's rather thin and it works well with keeping the metal parts clean. I use a cloth and go over all of the pieces, re-oiling them. I make sure that I get oil inside of the die and inside of the housing for the punch. Okay, now it's time to put the nibbler back together. If you remember, I counted 6.5 rotations for the punch. I'll insert the punch and make sure I grab the threads when I start counting, and count 6.5 rotations to get the correct height that I had before. The DeWalt 898 allows you to place the punch and the punch housing facing any ways of 90 degrees. That will allow you to set up the nibbler however you want to cut any direction. So I am careful to place the punch back how I had it, which is also the default way of the nibbler setup. Now, placing the housing back over the punch is, in my opinion, the most difficult part of cleaning the nibbler. It is hard to get it to fit correctly, and as you can see, I am struggling with it. I use a paper towel to get some better grip holding the housing. When putting the housing on, you have to make sure that it matches the alignment of the punch. It becomes difficult when the punch hits it on an angle and shifts ever so slightly so that the housing does not fit. There we go. Now we will put the die back on. The die goes back on in the same exact way that we took it off. Just line it up with the indent for the pin, slide it on, and then insert the pin. And then once that is in, pull the cover down over it. Okay, pay attention, this is a crucial step. Before plugging the nibbler in, it is highly important to check this. On the top of the nibbler, there is a warning that says, "Important. After adjusting punch, make sure screw turns freely at least one turn in both directions or punch breakage will occur." Grab a flathead screwdriver and cycle the nibbler. The punch should move up and down freely, which it does, in both directions. Also, notice that it goes up above in the housing and down below the die, the way we had it before. This will ensure that we get clean and complete cuts. I'm going to open it so that the punch is in the housing. I'll get some WD-40 and place it inside. This will add some extra lubricant. Now I plug in the nibbler and give it some power and test it out. The nibbler works fine. Now we just have to screw that Allen screw back in. Make sure you screw it in all the way so that the housing is secure. And that concludes this tutorial. Make sure you clean your nibbler often and keep track of how well it is cutting. I like to add a little WD-40 to the nibbler periodically as I cut. I prefer WD-40 because it is thin, but be careful not to do too much because then metal will start to collect inside the punch. Well, that's it from me. Good luck with your nibblers.